Well, you know, we talked about the state of K through 12 education in Michigan a little earlier on, but there is a lot of focus on Detroit Public Schools Community District. And one of our partners in the Detroit Journalism Cooperative is Chalkbeat Detroit. And reporter Aaron Einhorn has done a lot of stories on not only the leadership of new super Nikolai Vitti, but the expectations of teachers and administrators at struggling schools and how difficult it can be for parents to access better schools for their kids. But first, we took a look at the big picture at the effectiveness of the district so far this school year.
There's definitely more of a feeling of hopefulness, I think, that we've had this year than we had had in the past. You know, years of emergency management, years of difficulty. The new superintendent, Dr. Vitti, has brought certainly a lot of confidence to the role that he's in. He has an air of competence. He's brought, you know, I think most of the people who've met him, the people I talk to who've met him, who've heard him speak, come away generally feeling pretty positive about what he's going to do.
Do they feel that he's accessible to them more so than any of the emergency management has been before?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's everywhere, right? He does a lot of media, he does a lot of TV, he does a lot of radio, he does a lot of public events. He'll stay and take questions. He'll take a lot of questions. He gives kind of long answers, and I think for the most part he's telling people what they do want to hear, which is, I'm going to expand programs. I'm going to expand art and music and robotics and gifted programs and AP programs and foreign language programs, like all the stuff that this district hasn't had in quite some time. That's fairly standard in more affluent school districts. The question's going to be, obviously, whether that's actually going to be able to happen.
So what have you been able to see so far from this first half of a year that he is going to be able to implement some of the things that he's telling parents, hang on, wait, this is what we want to be able to do?
I think there are some very serious challenges. I mean, you know, so he says he can find the money in the budget to pay for things like arts and music because, you know, a lot of things in the Detroit schools have been, you know, purchasing was at the school level. And so by bringing some of the contracts, centralizing, creating efficiencies, you can find more money. But you can't create an art and music program unless you can hire enough arts and music teachers. So just funding the programs isn't enough. And the biggest challenges facing this district isn't just money. It's the teacher shortage, which has caused all kinds of serious problems. And you know, Dr. Vitti, despite his best efforts, has so far not been able to address that. Now he's got some programs that he says are going to address it over time, but people are going to want to see change, and they're going to want to see change quickly. And I think he'd be the first to say that change is going to take, it's going to take some time before we see any real...
Well, especially at some of the schools that the state is now watching and saying that you have certain benchmarks that you have to achieve, or we're going to have to reassess the state of where the school is and maybe have to do something about it. What are those schools doing right now to try to change things?
Yeah, so there were 24 schools in the district that were put on a closure list last year and told, you know, we're going to shut you down at the end of the year. And then there was a lot of political opposition. Those schools were allowed to stay open when they went into this state partnership program, in which they committed to meet certain benchmarks over the next 18 months, 3 years. And then an additional group of schools were put into that program more recently. So now it's like 50 schools, which is almost half the schools in the district. And they're in that program because they have had persistently low test scores, some of the lowest test scores in the state. So those schools need to bring those scores up, and they need to do so quickly in order to, you know, continue. And that's really, really very difficult.
Well, that takes leadership from the principals who are in the building. But again, it goes back to teachers and making sure that you have the right amount of teachers in the classroom, but the ones that are qualified to be able to teach these kids at a level or meet them where they are right now.
Well, it's also important to note that, you know, a lot of people will look at those schools and say, oh my gosh, you know, 3% of kids are meeting state standards in their grade level. And they'll think, well, that school is terrible, nothing's happening in that school. But what they don't realize often is that kids come into the school, you know, maybe, you know, a fifth grader comes in reading at third grade level, and the teacher works with that child and works really hard with that child and brings that child up to fourth grade level, or say, you know, fourth grade and a half, right? You get a year and a half of growth. But
it's still not fifth grade level.
It's still not fifth grade level, so that when that child takes the state exam, the M-STEP, that child's not going is essentially going to show up as though they didn't pass the test. And so schools, the Detroit schools in general, are really faced with having to do two really difficult things at the same time. They got to bring the kids up from where they were, and they have to teach grade level material. So you have to teach, say in a math class, you might have to teach whole numbers and fractions simultaneously so that they'll catch up from where they were and be where they're supposed to be, and that's really very difficult. So I don't think anyone expects that, you know, kids are going to start taking the exam, you know, in a couple of months. I don't think there's any reason to think the scores will be appreciably different than they have been in the past. And so then people are going to say, well, you know, to the superintendent, you know, you're supposed to be this great hope. Why aren't we seeing change? And he's going to say patience. It's going to take time.
My entire interview with Erin at MiWeek.org, plus we have to link to Chalk Beat Detroit as part of the DJC. Nolan, she talked a lot about consistency and what we're going to have to continue to see from the district.
And processes. I mean, they just had to give back $6.5 million that they couldn't afford to give back to the state because of incompetent processes.
Yeah, and that's what VD says surprised him when he came in, was that things are in that bad a shape after so many years of emergency management, which was supposed to fix it.
And we're going to continue to talk about DPSCD and, of course, schools in Michigan as the year goes on.